Welcome to the Mindshare Workspace, and welcome to this Stephen Hurley from VoiceEd Radio. And we're going live on VoiceEd as well as Periscope.
And we are now officially live on VoiceEd Radio. Robert Martellacci, welcome to This Week in EdTech, which happens to be your show, but you've kind of taken over here, haven't you?
Well, I figured, why not make it a blended learning experience where you can listen on your radio show as well as live on Twitter through Periscope.
Well, this is a first for VoiceEd Radio. We have picked up live streams before. We have picked up YouTube live streams before, but this is the first time that anyone has said 5 minutes before the broadcast that we're going to be live streaming on Periscope as well. But it shows you the power of multimedia. This is multimedia, radio and video together. And if you want to turn off that phone, that would be really good.
Thank you.
We do respect the radio.
What is it about us getting together and breaking the rules? It seems every time I'm hanging out with you, Stephen.
Well, and the best is yet to come, as Frank Sinatra used to say. But it's great to see you today. This is our second live broadcast of the day. We just finished an interview with Kate Gatto from the Youth Philanthropy Initiative, and people will be able to hear that broadcast later today. But this is exciting. This Week in EdTech. This is about our 45th episode.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And as we move closer to our 1 year anniversary as VoiceEd Radio, it's an honor to have you as part of the team.
Thank you.
One of the founding fathers, if we would say.
Well, thank you. I'm feeling old all of a sudden. It's a state of mind. But he is older than me.
I said father, not grandfather. Yes, I am. Well, I am. Now look at this.
We're actually. I think we've done about 200 podcasts, and it's very apropos that I mentioned that the CAN Code initiative that was announced yesterday by Minister Baines at Microsoft Canada, investing $50 million in coding in K-12 education is quite groundbreaking. And it's the 50th anniversary, ironically, of Dr. Seymour Papert and his whole initiative around the logo language. And incidentally, he was my first ever podcast when I was doing my master's 10 years ago at Pepperdine University.
Yeah, and you had some illustrious people on your podcast. By the way, if you're listening in the background, this is a working mall. This is an active mall. We're just outside the Walmart, actually, and so there's people coming by every day. So some of the background noise that I refuse to get rid of, it just adds Absolutely. To the authenticity of this.
100%, and if anyone wants to join us as my guest to spend a day here at the Mindshare Workspace, we just opened in December. It's a co-working innovation center located in Air Mills Town Center, first of its kind in Canada, and it's a new way to work and learn. So we're really excited to be launching this new initiative.
So tell me a little bit about this announcement yesterday from Minister Baines, because
Sure.
I think this is really significant for a couple of reasons, but fill us in.
It sure is, and I tweeted it out last night, and I was watching a very well done report on CBC about the investment in $50 million for not-for-profits such as Actua and the Learning Partnership, and taking it global as an example, one of our partners, and we, through C21 Canada, we were part of that bid. And it's interesting that they funded not-for-profits, and the impact is estimated to be on 1 million students. So we have approximately 5 million students in Canada, thereabouts. So I think it's a great start, but some of the constructive criticism was around the fact that the equity issue comes into play because it's only 1 million students. Thoughts on that?
Right. Well, I think the equity issue will always come into play, and it's interesting you mentioned Microsoft because Martha Jez from Microsoft is going to be partnering with VoiceEd Radio in February for a very in-depth series on accessibility and inclusive education and that whole equity piece. And it's something Martha's very passionate about, and we're really excited to explore that because I think we have to poke at some of the elephants in the room, to mix a metaphor, and 1 million, 5 million. million. That's an interesting ratio.
It is.
And there are pockets, as we say, and I always like to say, get your hands out of your pockets. There are pockets of innovation taking place all across the country, but we are still saddled with some really deep and important conversations about equity that need to take place.
Absolutely, and incidentally, I just saw a tweet of Martha's this morning. She's off to the BEC conference in the UK in London, and we're off to FETC in Orlando. Unfortunately, they conflict and clash. I've been to both in the past, and we're excited to host our 13th Can-Am Celebration of Excellence partnering reception there this Thursday.
Well, in terms of accessibility, and it's interesting you mentioned the fact that two prominent people in the EdTech field are going to be in two different places. I think the time has come where technology will allow us to link conferences, and one of the things that we're trying to do with Voice Ed Radio is get out and do some linking. But why can't one Skype into the other, or to use a Microsoft product now, form those connections? Why, if I'm going to a conference in Florida, can't I be at a conference in the UK at the same time?
Well, funny you mentioned that. We're actually going to be connecting with Tim Gard, who's at BET as well, who's one of our chief bloggers. Will be linking up with me to compare notes while I'm down at FETC.
See, this is exciting stuff. So can we get back to the CODA thing? Because you like to pull me off in all different sorts of directions here. But the initiative that was announced yesterday is a federal initiative, am I wrong?
It's a federal initiative, that's right.
Which I think is really significant because for many years people have either celebrated or bemoaned the fact that Canada does not have a federal office of education. And I think it's, I could say, we're live on.
I'm throwing him off. I'm showing Stephen that we're live on Periscope right now.
Yeah. It's like that image of looking in the mirror of someone looking in the mirror of someone.
That is so cool.
Yeah. Anyways,
sorry to distract you.
Stay with me, sir.
Yes. Focus, as I tell my kids.
But here is an example where the federal government is actually impacting public education right across Canada. We don't have a federal office of education.
We don't.
But this is one of those times when the federal government is seeing the value of equity right across the country.
Absolutely, and perhaps it's a sign of things to come. Funding is always a challenge, and I think it's kudos to the feds who stepped in to, some uncharted waters, if you will, going back to our confederation. Education is a provincial jurisdiction, but innovation in the country that we're in is so vital that it is a federal mandate. So I'm excited about the potential. I think, we're here redefining the future of work and learning. And, you've got young kids in the system and you value that type of learning of the future.
Well, I think we're going to have to redefine how we do fund public institutions like education, like healthcare. And if federal initiatives can help us with that. I think, you mentioned it's uncharted territory. It's very, very much a charted landscape right from the beginning of Confederation in the history of the Canadian Education Association. If you go through the archives, it has always been an issue that's reared its head and caused people a little bit of consternation, if I've said that word correctly. It's always been it's never been something that's really had a lot of traction, but it's always been there in the background.
Well, that's a good segue to my top 10 predictions for 2018 and partnerships. Partnerships are critical, and in this case, I think it's a wonderful partnership where we've got some substantial funding to enable us to expand the program nationally. And it's utilizing not-for-profits, which is another partner in the equation. And as C21 Canada, as president of that and founder of that organization, we're thrilled to be part of it through taking it global and playing a role within that. So that's one of my predictions, that we're going to see more partnerships forged in 2018.
Well, I think it's a good prediction, and I think it's time for a new metaphor, Robert. Partnerships to me always smacks of winners and losers, and me getting something out of the
Right.
partnership and you getting something out of the partnership, and it has to be mutually beneficial. It often has this undertone of corporations and public institutions coming together as well, and some people will react to that. But here's the metaphor I'd like to present for 2018, and one that I'm using more and more, is the metaphor of ecosystem. In an ecosystem, we all depend on one another, and the survival of your part of the ecosystem plays into the survival of mine, and it's a sustainable metaphor. It's a metaphor that forces us to think about sustainability, and I think it's more of it's a different way of looking at it. And I think if you look at the organizations that exist across this country, not only in the EdTech domain, but right across education. You have the Canadian Education Association, you have the Council of Ministers of Education, you have the Learning Partnership, you have Mindshare Learning. All of these people have been exploring those connections. And I just think that metaphor of ecosystem might help us explore them on a deeper level.
Yeah, I love the notion of ecosystem, and but mutually beneficial partnerships. We could not have launched this space, as an example, our Workspace, without the partnerships we have with on our advisory board with the University of Toronto, with Sheridan, with Bosch Dremel, with Microsoft, with Dell and C21, and a number of other partners. So definitely it is an ecosystem that's broadening, and there's more of an openness, I find, in education for those vital partnerships, because many of the not-for-profits that won the bids for CanCode have private companies or public companies that are part of it, like Microsoft, like Logix Academy, to enable the implementation, if you will. So I think that's really important, but the ecosystem is changing. I'd like to talk about redefining the classroom of the future, and it's not just about technology. It is an ecosystem that encompasses the broader scope of school design thinking, and that incorporates, and thanks to your inspiration, of course, and the likes of Randall Fielding, world-renowned architect. It's really important that we be mindful of the stakeholders who are at the table that can empower the future of learning and accelerate. And getting beyond pockets of innovation. I'm really tired about pockets of innovation. Every school should be innovative, have an innovative mindset. Every district should have an innovative mindset.
Well, even pockets as a metaphor. What do you use pockets for? Pockets in clothing are usually used to store lint, things that you end up at the end of the day getting rid of, but we hold in our pockets. Pockets from a dental perspective, that's the stuff where stuff can gather and it gets old and infection. And I think if you look at ecosystems, we have to be prepared if we're going to accept that metaphor, and I propose that we do. I think we have to be prepared to do a little intentional destruction. If you're in forestry, you know that you do planned burns of parts of the ecosystem in order to foster new growth. Well, what are we willing to burn down in education, as part of that ecosystem in order to foster new growth? And we have to be courageous. And Ron Campbell will talk about that courage till the cows come home, but we do.
Absolutely, and a good example of that is when you look at my school visit down to Thames Valley at the STEAM school in St. Thomas is a great example of overcoming, retrofitting, if you will, and thinking outside the classic box, where a school that was built in 1898, the city stepped in, renovated the school, put a maker space on the main floor. The second floor was a school within a school, a high school where students do passion projects, and the top floor is a co-working space. I mean, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant, and sometimes you need to go outside the city, the big city centers, to see real innovation, because really necessity is the mother of invention.
And not only do we have to go outside the big city centers, I think we have to go outside the contexts that we're used to living in. And so some of the work in strategic foresight that I'm doing and thinking about almost constantly, asks us to look for signals of change. And those signals are often those weak initiatives, not weak initiatives, but weak signals. They're small initiatives that are active on the edges of different contexts. So you look at AI, for example, and some of the innovations that are being done that nobody knows about. They're not being done in education necessarily. They're being done in other parts of the ecosystem. And I think we really have to become observant and attuned to those signals, listen for them, and then ask ourselves, what would happen if that signal got a little bit louder in this context, and prepare for that.
Right. Awesome.
It is awesome.
Could I move on to my next prediction?
He's ready to move on.
So the maker movement continues to gain steam in 2018, thanks again to that Can Code initiative. Another cool
thanks in part to that Can Code initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for keeping me on the straight and narrow, Stephen. Mobile learning redefined.
What does that mean?
Yeah, something I came up with, that mobile learning redefined. When you think about mobile learning, the thinking is around devices. But mobile learning, to me, redefined, is looking at learning spaces and the mobility and flexibility of learning spaces, like this environment that we created here at the Mindshare Workspace. Everything shifts around. Just like we created this little studio today with this mobile LCD panel that's here, and as a backdrop, as an example.
We should have Voice Ed Radio website up there next week.
Okay. We'll trade. Yeah, we'll get that up next time. But we're going to get you a pop-up banner like this one here. Okay. So how's that sound? We'll plan for that, so we get you some branding. Stephen is a true educator that is just coming into the world of work and learning. So I'm mentoring him, and he's mentoring me when it comes to pedagogy.
We're taking each other to school. And speaking of school and mobile learning, and so your word this year is agile. And so
that's right.
This is a very agile space, so that you can
100%.
Flip tables, you can put tables together, you can take tables apart, and I think that's really important. But what if we were to extend that thinking a little bit? And my son Liam has been here the past 2 Saturdays, and you facetiously and kind of jokingly suggested that maybe he come to school here. But what if we were to think, in terms of the week that we have, we send kids to school 5 days a week, in one location, in one classroom, with the same kids all the time, whether they get along or not, whether it meets their needs or not. What if we were to say, okay, you can come here 3 days a week and be with these kids in this context, but here are 2 days a week where maybe you go out and explore something else. And granted, I know there's some equity issues built into that because
100%.
Parents are working and whatnot. But what if this space were opened up to the community and say, kids could be here during the day learning, however, robotics, coding, music, whatever, the arts. I think we need to expand what we mean by mobile learning.
Well, it's a great case in point. I mean, having Liam here and having him present to me a proposal on creating EdShare.
8 years old, by the way.
Yeah, 8-year-old kid.
My son.
Is sitting with me in the boardroom negotiating a spin-off of Mindshare Learning to EdShare, and explaining to me that it's going to be a concept where teachers come here and collaborate on the weekend.
And have coffee.
And coffee. And great coffee, free coffee. And so, and that inspired him to work on a website at 6 a.m. in the morning, as you explained to me, one school day. I mean, the amount of learning that he's experienced in taking on this little passion project of his, if you will, is off the charts.
It's an example. This idea has transformed him. It's given him not only a sense of purpose, but a different sense of who he is. For the past 3 weeks, he has gone to school better dressed than you or I. He now has his own set of bow ties. He's wearing a gold bow tie today to school. He's going to get kicked around a bit for that.
I know. He's not your typical average kid, and that presents a challenge, doesn't it?
It does.
Because he's so, I was going to use the term gifted, different, unique, passionate about life and learning and projects, and how does the school system cater to a kid like
Well,
that?
they're not really built to cater to them, and what you have are the butting up against two narratives, the personalization narrative and the equity narrative. So how does a publicly funded system provide an equitable experience, but also allow for that personalization? And I think that is the challenge of the remainder of the 21st century.
Well, the good news is one of my other predictions is that students, I've quoted, I've got the power, student voice and empowerment will be stronger in 2018 than ever before. From an equity perspective and personalization, there is that, I think, classic tipping point where leadership in education is recognizing that kids are different. You need to cater to their emerging needs, and that's really exciting. I think, after all, they're the customer.
Well, you know what? It's interesting you say that because, and I don't mean to point at you, but
That's okay. As long as you're not poking me in the eye.
Here's the shift that I think I see taking place, and I think it's going to get louder and louder. Our young people, our students, young people in communities are no longer waiting for the traditional institutions to give them voice. Technology has allowed them to take that voice and to raise that voice, and I think that is so powerful it sends shivers up my spine every time I think of it. We have one of the directors of the Ontario Trustees Association coming on to Voice Ed Radio, and we're going to be talking about doing some work to raise that voice. We can pretend Voice Ed Radio is a platform for voice, but unless students see that as a platform for authentic voice, then it's just going to be our construction of that.
Well, that's a great reference you made, and the report that was released by the Ontario Student Trustees Association, I think, was brilliant on what they want to see in schools. I think they interviewed about 7,000 or 8,000 students, teachers, and stakeholders, and came up with some really good recommendations. And equity was very much a part of it, the personalization of learning. And the best person to start with when you want to improve a system is your customer. And for a very long time, we've always sought external experts to improve education.
Yes.
Classic case in point is Dr. Michael Fullen. But when you ask the students, and the feedback you get is bang on. It's groundbreaking, and I think it's exciting.
It is exciting.
It's great that you're amplifying their voice. The most listened to education radio station in Canada, without a doubt, is Voice Ed Radio.
It's the only education radio station in Canada. In fact, the only 24/7 education radio station in the world.
And who do you think is the most widely read e-magazine in Canada in education?
Mindshare Learning, probably. So we're a
mutual admiration
you need
society.
that in an ecosystem, right? You need that in an ecosystem. I'm just checking my time.
How are we doing time-wise?
We're up at the 22-minute mark. You're listening to Voice Ed Radio and watching live on Twitter through Periscope. This week in EdTech with Robert Martellacci. I like this concept. I like this.
I think it's raising your game here. I think I've never seen you more passionate and more elevated in terms of your arousal level.
We can talk about that later. But,
excitement level about the show.
Yeah, you're probably right. But I think it's also we have to be a little more focused when we're live on TV.
See, that's why I wanted to surprise you today with Periscoping this. And let's talk about data security and privacy as one of the top 10 predictions for 2018.
And it's I think that's an issue that many people don't think affects them, but it does, whether we know it or not. And I think the fact that we don't know how much it affects us is really scary.
Absolutely. And speaking of your own kids, how do you grapple with that challenge in terms of their privacy and safety?
They're becoming more attuned to it. I am constantly being vigilant in terms of where they feel comfortable and justified in putting personal information in. So they're not at the stage where they're doing a lot of inputting of data online, but they will be. They have access to a Gmail account. It's kind of locked down a little bit through the Halton District School Board
Right.
For example, they can no longer post to YouTube because you have to be a certain age to do that, and they're not. But I think they're growing up in a time where they see my anxiety around it, and they realize that it's important.
I think education has a huge role to play in that regard, and to making students, digital citizens, that are mindful of their footprint digitally. I've interviewed students in the past, for co-op opportunities, and one of the things I always do is Google their name first. And, sometimes you'll see a video pop up and you're playing the video and there's drinking in it and swearing, and it's like, well, you've just ended your opportunity with us, because that's not the kind of character individual we want as part of our organization.
I think as adults, though, we need to become more conversant with the privacy. We know that when we go to a store and present our Air Miles card, we know that information about us is being collected. If we don't, we should know that.
Hence, we don't use Air Miles any longer.
Well, I gave that up a long time ago, but the same is true with any sort of loyalty program.
Right.
They're paying you for that information, and we're complicit in that.
Right.
I think it's these hidden things that we need to be aware of. I asked someone the other day, I just started exploring the If This Then That app, the IFTTT app that links our data together. And I was asking someone who knows about the data landscape, whether it's secure, whether it's safe, and they indicated that it was. I mean, you're giving a set of third-party organizations access to your G Drive, your Google Drive, to your LinkedIn through a token system, which you can revoke at any time.
Are we going to start to get into Bitcoin now too, or
no? Not that's next week. I've got one more book to read on Bitcoin and the blockchain, but I think that's fascinating as well. But, but I don't want us to get paranoid about it. Because
no, absolutely not. Well, so let's talk about 3D printing. What do you think of 3D printing in 2018? We've got a cool device here in the Bosch Dremel printer, and that is getting a lot of attention these days. And you can pretty much make anything you want.
Or some things that you don't want, actually. So I think there's a lot of novelty around it. Yeah, well, I mean, who wants a big dinosaur head? I mean,
Well, those are just pre-made examples.
Well, that's right. But I think there's a lot of novelty around it. But I think
it's in the design process. Yeah. It's in the design, not the finished product.
But when you look around the world, and I was talking to a superintendent in Dufferin Peel 2 years ago, Sue Steer, was talking about secondary students at one of her schools using a 3D printer to make limbs for people around the world. And I think that those stories are powerful.
I've seen that. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's beyond the box. I think it's the mindset that so many things can be
the untapped potential. It's the imagination behind it, creativity. And I know you're big on imagination.
Imagination is where I live and breathe. I mean, without imagination, you don't have creativity, and without creativity, you don't have innovation.
Well, speaking of which, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our 10th annual Classroom of the Future Challenge. It's not wrapped up yet. It's been extended to February the 19th, where you can win fabulous prizes, including a Bosch Dremel printer and over $50,000 in classroom tools and software and robots by sharing your vision of the classroom of the future.
So that's an imaginative exercise right there that I think every classroom in this country should be involved with. I mean, and let's get some different ideas. Let's really drill down not only into the physical design, but also the conceptual design of what a classroom is. This is a classroom. This is a classroom. Why? Because we're learning here. Every week on This Week in EdTech, we learn something new.
You teach me something new every week, Stephen. Have I ever told you that?
You learn it, too.
I'm a lifelong learner. What could I say? How are we doing time-wise?
Well, we're almost at the point where I have to say to you, safe travels. You're headed to Florida tomorrow.
Sadly.
Yeah?
Should we extend this to an hour next time?
Well, if we're going live like this, I mean...
we don't want to put people to sleep.
Well, someone said, and I'm going to say it was Einstein, but it probably was someone else that said that the mind can only absorb what the seat of the pants can endure. So, it's up to you.
With that, well said.
So, So you're off to Florida tomorrow to the FETC.
We're looking
Florida
forward to
Education-
seeing the latest in EdTech at the Future of Education Technology Conference.
I wonder if Brad Schreffler, our correspondent in Florida, is going to be there. We'll have to look out for him.
Well, I'm hoping to interview Sir Ken Robinson, one of the keynotes, and others while we're there. So stay tuned for live updates from FETC.
Yes, and you come back safe because we have an event on Saturday evening that you can't miss, and we'll tell you about that next week.
Absolutely, we'll debrief. With that, thank you for joining us here at the Mindshare Workspace.
Live on Twitter and on Voice Ed Radio. Your voice is right here.
And until next time, keep the learning curve steep.